Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Vanorsdale Learning Lab podcast. I'm Dr. Christie,
I'm Dr. Kimmy.
and we're just a couple of doctors who love to nerd out about learning stuff. And today, Dr. Kimmy, what are we talking about?
Today we're going to talk about something we have coined the measurement illusion. So we like to talk in this podcast about ways that things are misconceived. And so today we're talking about how the measurement of learning and learning outcomes in our trainings can be a little bit, well, for lack of a better word, underwhelming. So I'm going to start off by passing it to you with a question, Christy. So
Hey.
you have told me about this measurement illusion, okay? And you have told me that the most dangerous sentence in corporate training is something like, this training went great. Having that be the worst sentence is so counterintuitive. So I wanted to know why you say this.
Sure. So it kind of being people who have worked in this field for as long as we have, and we've been instructional designers and we've been systems designers and we've been researchers, we've done it all. It's sort of like when you give a subject matter expert a script for a new course or an outline or a blueprint to develop, something new, right? And you're asking them for feedback on it and they respond with, looks good,
Mm-hmm.
right? And if you've worked in our line of work for a long time, you know that level of feedback, it sounds good, but it doesn't actually clue you into what might be issues with the content itself, really because you didn't ask the right questions, frankly. I mean, I started giving forms to my subject matter experts and asking very pointed questions to make sure that I'm getting very specific feedback back. I started doing that years ago because looks great, found out wasn't very helpful at all. And you don't want to find out post-production that there were problems, right? So when we're thinking about just in terms of like, oh, the training itself went well, and that's the feedback that you get. When somebody says it went great or it went well, it almost always means a couple of things. One is, first of all, people showed up. So that was great. People finished it, and that's another great thing. And we handed out smile sheets afterwards. And so when people say things looked great or things went well, they usually mean three things. It means people attended, people finished it, and they rated it from a high level of satisfaction on the smile sheet afterwards, right?
Mm-hmm.
And every one of those can be true, but none of those are actually measuring whether learning occurred or whether we can count on immediate behavior change or future behavior change based on what was taught, right? And so that's why I say it's dangerous, especially from a business standpoint, because this false sense of it worked, it's an illusion that is actually very expensive. And so that's why I say it's dangerous. So budgets can get renewed for programs that actually produced nothing, and programs that would work never get built because we don't think we need to change what we're doing. Because according to the dashboard, it's fine. Why should we change what we're doing? Right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's kind of what I mean by it's the most dangerous sentence in corporate training.
But so attendance, completion, satisfaction, those are pretty industry standard though. So how did these metrics that tell us so little become the default?
That's a very good question, actually. And frankly, it's just because those are the metrics that training platforms give you for free, right? Those are the metrics that come standard with every LMS. An LMS counts logins and completions, and it can sometimes tell you, and I'm talking standard out of the box metrics, right? It can sometimes tell you how long someone spent on something, but even then, that's not something you can count on because someone can start something and walk away or click away, and the system could continue to count, right? So you can really only count on the user logged in, the user completed it. And those are metrics that, again, come free with the system, and there's no instructional design or no behavior change rationale behind it. So that's the first one. The second one is that historically, the learning and development field has sort of inherited a habit of measuring reactions first and outcomes rarely. And that kind of repeated sort of framework that we've used over the years to like focus on reactions first. How do people react to the content? Did they show up? We falsely assume that just because they showed up, that meant, first of all, that it must have been great. Otherwise, they wouldn't have come. And we also tend to assume that human beings can just sort of absorb knowledge like a sponge. And so again, you showed up, you were in the room, therefore you must have learned something. And that belief has just persisted over the years. And it's kind of done something that on the one hand, we can call it calcified. But because you and I are second language acquisition experts, I'm going to use the term fossilized. But when it comes to the brain, it means the same thing, right? It's just kind of become sort of a fossilized or calcified habit, and we don't seem to know how to get out of it now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Learner satisfaction has close to no relationship with whether learning occurred. And that's a scientific fact that has been tested, that has been proven over and over again. Something that I really want to mention, and this is, again, based on what we know about Bloom's taxonomy, from Bloom's taxonomy, which is just based on how we operationalize learning across a cognitive scale. So Bloom's taxonomy is built on the concept of difficulty versus complexity. And so something that's difficult, you can understand something that's difficult. You can remember something that's difficult. You can do something that's difficult. And you may have learned something from it, but you rate it poorly, right? Because it was hard to do, right? And so sometimes perception does not equal learning. And I think that's the the big takeaway here. And so in short, your best rated course might actually be your least effective. And your dashboard is not able to tell you which is which. Because again, completion rates and whether or not the learner logged into the system may currently be the only thing that you're tracking.
All right. Let's get specific about where organizations actually stop measuring and where the evidence is saying that they need to go.
Right. So there is a framework that I discovered a couple of, I want to say maybe a year or so ago. And I've been really liking it because it really highlights everything that I've been seeing with my time as a consultant. And it really mirrors a lot of the work that we're doing internally, which is ranking 8 tiers of evidence. And so, we talked a lot about how a lot of evidence of whether learning occurred sort of starts and stops with learner satisfaction and completion rates. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And what we do know is that, like most organizations, for example, they never get past the bottom 3 on this scale. So it's called Talamer's LTE, and it ranks the 8 tiers of evidence that we need to be collecting if we wanted to look at whether or not learning and development is having an impact on the change of the behavior and on the impact of the skills that they're applying on the job. And what this framework talks about is how most organizations never get past the bottom 3, which are attendance, completion activity, and learner ratings. So those tiers measure whether the training ran. So was it conducted or not?
Mm-hmm.
They say nothing about whether anyone can actually do anything.
Right.
And so the more sophisticated organizations that I've worked with will actually add a knowledge check and stop there. And that's still tier 4. Right. So when we look at tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, so we have attendance and completion, and then we have learner activity and learner perceptions. So this is where most organizations tend to cycle in and out of. They just get stuck in this like trench right here. And this is what I meant earlier when I said these tiers are only measuring whether the training actually took place.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not saying anything about whether or not anyone can do the thing that they learned. So some of the more sophisticated organizations that I've worked with, they may add a knowledge check and stop there, but that's still tier 4, right? So immediate recall in the course environment typically measures minutes after instruction. So this is before any forgetting has occurred. And, forgetting is a huge part of learning and development and behavior change, right? So if you're providing a knowledge check immediately after the training occurs, it only answers, for example, did they know it at that moment in time, which could be 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. It's very different from the question of can they do it under pressure 3 weeks later? Because that's the important part, right? Like that's why we're doing workplace training. It's so that they can do this under pressure at the time that it's needed. And so when we look a little bit further up this model, we can see the tiers that actually matter to a business are transfer and its effects. So the learner performing the new behavior in the actual workflow and the operational metric moving because they did. And what I have found, and I'm sure this is your experience as well, is that almost no one is measuring these. And that reason is pretty structural based on what I've seen. It's because L&D, they can see the LMS, but L&D cannot see the job because
Mm.
L&D is so siloed and removed and segregated from actual work that's being done on the floor. So the only people positioned to observe performance where it actually happens are frontline managers. And what I have found is that nobody's equipping them to do it. So what equipping them actually means concretely is we need to be providing frontline managers a short behavioral observation checklist, for example. And this checklist should tie directly back to the competency framework. If you have a competency framework, if you don't, then you have to get one. So this could be 5 to 7 observable behaviors, not like 50 or 30. But then we also need to be measuring it at different increments. So 30 days, 60 days, and 90 days post-training, because this is where we need to be paying attention to information decay, right? People are forgetting things, and decay isn't visible. And it's also not just day one performance, right? It needs to be embedded in routines managers already run. So their weekly one-to-ones, their monthly one-to-ones, how they are managing whether or not their employees are meeting their KPIs. It needs to be embedded in those systems. Ride-alongs, call reviews, that sort of stuff. So this way it costs minutes. We're not creating new meetings or new processes around what they're already doing. But here's the important part, and this model actually doesn't call this out. This is where I'm coming back to the work that we do at VLL. And I'm saying this is where a lot of companies, even if you are doing this, are still dropping the ball, which is that we need a direct channel for all of this data to be coming back to L&D, monthly, quarterly, whatever it is, aligning with your business goals, so that we can measure it against where they were when they completed the training, right? See if there's been any major changes, but also determine if users are forgetting what they've learned. If we're thinking about blooms, right? Did they go from remember to analyze, apply, and create? Have they been able to generate new knowledge based on what they learned from our training, right? And finally, this tells you if it's working. Whether or not they showed up to the training and whether or not they enjoyed the training doesn't tell you if it's working. But if you can measure whether or not it transferred to work performance, then you probably have a much better idea, I'm sure, right? So the return channel is the part that everyone omits. That's the big one that I see. It's what turns measurement into a system. So when observation data comes back, L&D can finally see which behaviors stick, like I said, which ones are being forgotten and where. And this can be broken down by team, by region, by manager. And then that's the difference between evaluation as a report card and evaluation as design input.
I think it's great. It's a really good attempt to visualize or visually represent, I guess I should say, transfer of learning. I mean, it's something that I've looked into many times for presentations and doctoral essays and things like that. And it's just really hard to measure. So I really like the idea that you gave. Something that really stuck out to me is having some concretes, but some, not too many, because then you're just going to get bogged down by measuring different outcomes, but just 5 meaningful things maybe that can show that this training resonated and also was absorbed and is now being applied to the workplace in meaningful ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. You don't need a doctorate to do this work, but you do need to understand. You do need to understand things like this, right? Like these types of frameworks and measuring change and how to apply treatments and analyze the effects of that treatment and pivot to a new treatment if it's not working. And these are all things that, we had to do in grad school and things that we, have had to do in our fields of work. knowledge that we have to be able to prove that we know how to do these things. And, we get into conversations a lot with people who say that that's gatekeeping and, like anybody can do L&D, anybody can do training. You don't need to have a degree in education. You don't need to have a background in learning science. And it's like, please make that make sense. I mean, your
Right.
whole job is to change behavior. Your whole job is change management. You're supposed to change behavior and manage that behavior, be able to design interventions and treatments, and then collect data on that information and then report to leadership whether or not your interventions work. So I don't know.
Without the knowing how the sausage is made, you're just left with just a bunch of pretty TPS reports. Do you remember that movie Office Space? Yeah.
Yeah.
You have data. You're data informed, but if your data is just what did you call it? You called it a smile sheet?
Yeah.
I love
Smile
that.
sheet.
I've never heard of that before. That's great. But yeah, it's just you're basically trying to measure vibes. You have
breakfast spread, you will get a 5 out of 5 from me every time. Yeah.
And you get paid for it. Yeah. This approach is a nice way to kind of incrementalize what happens in the learning process and the transfer of learning process. All of that good stuff. So
Yeah, absolutely. All right.
Okay, so as I mentioned, smile sheets. Let's say you're a learning development leader and you go into a quarterly review with these completion rates and the smile sheets. What happens next typically? Let's set up what is probably most often occurring in the field, and then we could talk about ways to suggest bringing in this model.
Right. So leadership here is activity, not impact. That's what you're actually reporting on. And what that does is it's quietly or maybe loudly, I don't know, filing learning and development as a cost center. So it becomes a function of the business that can only report activity. And those functions are treated as overhead and they're funded like overhead. But it's a double-edged sword, especially in my line of work as a consultant. And consultants are usually only called in, when sort of like the dumpster's already on fire. And what I find is that the L&D team isn't incompetent, right? It's just that they're reporting the only data their system was built to produce. And this is a systems failure upstream of the people. So like clients that I've worked with, I would come in and I would say, okay, yes, here's the data the system will give you. Let me show you how to design for other data and then collect that data outside of the LMS. And this is where the term learning ecosystem comes into play, is where I'm talking to people about, there's the LMS, but there are other ways that we can be collecting data in other formats using other tools. And then we can take all of that data, we can synthesize it with what the LMS is giving, right? And that's how you get a full, complete picture. But it can't stop with whether or not people showed up and whether or not they had a good time.
Yeah, you need a very robust plan for it to be effective in the long run.
Absolutely.
And ideally, with a good plan, data governance plan in place, then getting those more applicable data points will be easier to do because you have equipped your employees and your line managers or whoever is responsible for documenting that to do that. So
yeah, and I just wrapped up another podcast before this where where somebody said, we all sort of said the same thing at the same time because we were talking about AI. If your data's wrong, then your analysis is going to be wrong. So garbage in, garbage out. Where a lot of my clients' gaps are is knowing what data to collect but back it up before that, because data is the output of the design. So you have to first design the right intervention for the right problem. So back it up even further. Are we designing for the right problem? Does the intervention solve this problem? Then do we get the data that we need to inform, right? So you have to back it all the way up. But if you design the wrong intervention because you designed for the wrong problem, then the shiny data that you get on the other side is still not going to give you the answers that you need because it's the wrong data. But I digress.
Oh, and I should just say for the listeners that if you want to learn anything about everything Christie just said, refer to our older podcast because they covered a lot of those issues in very good detail. So now we're thinking about how VLL thinks about measurements using Thalheimer or
Will Thalheimer's learning transfer evaluation model.
His framework. Can you give listeners a kind of an idea of how this can shape measurement VLL style.
Yeah. Yes. There are a lot of frameworks out there that you can use. My advice is to just have one at least. You've got to have something, This framework I've selected because it aligns the most with the work that I'm doing naturally based on my expertise and my experience, the problems and the gaps that I see that keep coming up, right? And, as academics, we're all about not reinventing the wheel. If there's a framework out there that works, we use that, credit the person who created it, of course. Vll Thalheimer's learning transfer evaluation model as the backbone, and we will link this in the show notes. But you can also Google it, of course. But to describe it, what it does is it ranks evidence by how much it actually tells you about the performance change. And the metrics almost everyone reports sit at the bottom of that ranking. So attendance completion, tier 1, learner activity, tier 2, learner perceptions, tier 3. And there are up to 8 tiers, right? So this just gives us a really good depth of understanding and depth of knowledge around how deep we're not going when it comes to performance measurement, right? And so if we kind of go up through the ladder, so to speak, starting from bottom to top, we have showing up. That's tier 1. Tier 2 is clicking through. Tier 3 is liking it. Tier 4 is knowing it. Then we have doing it in practice. Then we have doing it on the job. Then we have the business changing because they did it. So let me just run through those one more time so you can just kind of see the transformation that we're talking about here and what is actually needed versus what most organizations are doing. So most organizations are doing showing up, clicking through, and liking it. That's a majority of the organizations. I would say 80% of them. 20% of my sort of very high achieving organizations that I work with, they take it a step above and they go to knowing it. So they do actually measure a little bit of knowledge transfer at the end, but they're doing it right at the end and never again. What almost no one is doing, unless they work with us, of course, shameless plug, is doing it in practice, doing it on the job, the business changing because they did it. And so that's the really big part. I can't imagine any business leader, if you were to sit down and say to them, what is it that you think is actually going to help your business perform better and meet your quarterly goals, your year-end goals? Is it going to be just having people show up to the training, or is it going to be if I can demonstrate that your business has changed because people showed up for the training, right? That's a huge difference in what you can promise. And you can promise that if you are building your training programs to align with this framework or frameworks like it.
Mm-hmm. Some type of knowledge transfer.
You got to do something more than just that people show up, for sure.
Measuring the change and behavior change, right?
Yeah. I had somebody reach out to me on LinkedIn the other day, and they wanted to kind of talk shop about what my org does versus their org. And I'm like, I'm a consultant. He was trying to sell me or perhaps get me to partner with his product. He does a kind of a learning management system thing. And I just flat out asked him, he was like, oh, it's revolutionizing how companies can deliver training. And I was just like, well, tell me how you're measuring behavior change. And he was like, well, who says we aren't? And I was like, I'm asking you, tell me, how do you measure behavior change? And he was like, we're definitely doing it. Don't worry. He was like, we can absolutely, quantify to leadership that behavior has been changed with the training that our platform delivers. And so then I said, okay, let me get a little more specific. What behavior change framework are you using as your assessment tool? And you know what he said? NPS scores. NPS scores are learner satisfaction.
Okay.
NPS is like anytime someone does a conference, right? And then after you attend the conference, they'll ask you, did you enjoy the conference or not? And in marketing, a high net promoter score. It stands for net promoter score. So the net promoter score is the culmination of that smile sheet. So, and in marketing, it can be very valuable Because because if you're selling a conference or you're selling an experience or you're selling a 1 week all-inclusive getaway at a resort, if you see a high net promoter score, that means it was high satisfaction. So 5,000 people went on this cruise and they loved it. Of course I'm going to buy it. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
NPS equates to Amazon reviews. It equates to Google reviews. Like a high net promoter score for a restaurant is really good for sales. But we can't be using net promoter scores to measure behavior change because it doesn't. That's a lie. It's a flat out lie,
Well,
right?
if how can you measure change if there's only one point of data collection? You know what I mean? That's just,
Yeah.
I mean, I guess change from zero, but not change over time or change in the long term or change that is meaningful, quite frankly. So,
Impactful has it, and then again, like you mentioned, over time. So at the end of this training, I'm going to tell you I learned all the things. That doesn't mean I learned all the things.
mhm.
Just saying, did you learn the things is not,
For to
and
long-term memory or absorbed into your ears.
today or 2 months from now. Yeah, exactly. Point that demonstrating that I can perform this skill in a controlled environment is very different from demonstrating that I can do this skill in the heat of the moment when I'm on the call with a customer. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And that is why I think it's very important for us to extend the evaluation of that skill acquisition outside of the classroom, outside of the training module, into like frontline, where you're having your one-to-one with your manager and you're talking through how you've applied these skills
Right.
or what walls you came up against, those sorts of things.
Like, and I think that's a good pathway also for behavior change. Like you don't want to throw people in the deep end right away. You want them to like co-facilitate a meeting before doing it on their own, for instance. So I
Hmm.
think that is captured though in the hierarchy from our thought. What's one thing that they could take away and maybe ask about or apply to their own training data?
Okay. Excellent question, Dr. Kimmy. So if you are a leader right now and you want to kind of do a litmus test to see if any of the things that we've just talked about are going on in your organization, you could ask this. And so, yeah, you could just say, let's start with your most expensive program. That's always the most important one. So for our most expensive program, what evidence do we have beyond completion and satisfaction that anyone does their job differently because of it? If the answer is silence, or I'm not sure, or some form of that, then, well, that's your answer, basically. But the good news is there is help. Another shameless plug, of course. But no, I mean, we are doing the good work here. And as you can probably tell by now, we're very passionate about this.
Yeah, we're
And
not
so,
shamed. We're
yeah,
proud
we're
of
not.
this.
Exactly.
Not a
Exactly. Yeah.
shameless plug.
Yes. No shame. Absolutely. Yes. So as a gateway into working with us, I mean, we do offer full, sort of fractional chief learning sort of embedded, right, where we're kind of working alongside you and your team. But if that feels a little bit not right now, or you kind of want to just start with sort of can you just tell us what the heck we're doing wrong and maybe we can fix it ourselves approach, we do offer a learning system diagnostic where we kind of come in. It takes about 6 to 8 weeks. We collect and analyze data based on your actual users, your business goals, your existing learning management system. If you have one, if you don't, that's fine. Wherever you're managing your learning, we talk to your customers, your employees. And we break all that down and we look at what are the actual learning competencies that you should be designing your training for. So mapping everything back to your business outcomes, figuring out who your learner personas are so that we understand what their needs are around training. Training is rarely a one size fits all. We've worked with a lot of clients who have found that having personalized learning pathways for their employees and their customers has had an immense impact. And then finally, like taking a look at how you can optimize your current ecosystems to deliver and measure performance and change at scale, not just learner satisfaction. And so we can come in and we can gather all of that data to be able to produce that report for you within that short time frame. And that is a standalone engagement. You can take that report, you can go back to your internal team and you can say, let's make these changes, let's implement this ourselves. Or you can reach back out to us and talk to us about coming in and spearheading that with your internal team. So that is my no shame plug.
I love it.
Well, Dr. Kimmy, it's been another exciting VLL podcast with you today. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for this very fruitful discussion.
All right. Bye, everyone. We'll see you later.